Hello everyone. So now we are talking about history of early films as part of film appreciation, introduction to film appreciation. So to begin with, let's understand that what is cinema? Tell me, what is cinema? So films or cinema is a composite art form which incorporates features of many fine art forms, performance, art traditions, conventions of literature, and technological devices ranging from camera to the computer. Cinema is the storytelling form or the narrative form of the 20th century. A film is often referred to as a movie, picture, feature, talkie, flick, or a cinema. However, when the references to an individual motion picture, the word film or movie is generally used. On the other hand, normally the word cinema is preferred when the reference is to movie as a form of art, or cinema as a cultural practice, or cinema as a social institution. So, in the present context of high globalization, with the increased mobility of people around the world as a representational practice, cinema now speaks more or less in a universal idiom. And cinema is identified as one of the very, very profitable global entertainment industries. Therefore, as an art form, or as an entertainment mode or as an industrial product, it is very important that we know the origin, development, and the contemporary state of cinematic culture. So, in this module, in this class, um, we will discuss about few of the things. So this in this module, we discuss some of the major turning points in the history of early cinema. Here, the phrase early cinema means the films produced from 1895 to 1927. Okay, so why this bracket? In 1895, we had the first public screening of films. In 1927, the first feature length sound film or the talkie was released. Therefore, this initial era of films is very, very important. And these are the objectives of this session. First, to trace the early history of films, to understand the major features of early films, to figure out the pioneers of early films, and to understand the early filmmaking practices. Okay, so, right. So let's go ahead to the screening history of early cinema. The screening history of early cinema was officially inaugurated on 28th December 1895 in a small basement room of a Grand Cafe Hotel in Paris, which is a capital city of France. The basement room was called Les Salons Indiennes. Les Salons Indiennes, what does it mean? It means the Indian parlor. So, interestingly, India was very much an indirect participant in first ever public screenings of films. Although altogether 33 spectators attended the first screening, paying 1 French franc for a ticket. And in this first public screening, arranged for a ticketed audience, the French brothers Auguste Lumiere and Louis Lumiere showcased their 10 actuality films. I'm not calling them as reality films, I'm saying these are actuality films. So, the Lumiere brothers, they were actually associated with the manufacturing of photographic plates and related tools. And the duration of the Lumiere black and white films ranged from 30 to 50 seconds only. And for screening of these films, the Lumiere brothers used their newly invented wonder machine, and which is called the cinematograph. The cinematograph was a combination of a portable movie camera and a portable movie projector. So in this world premiere exhibition uh, event, I'll show you the names of 10 Lumiere films which were screened. Just a second. So yes, so these are 10 Lumiere films which were screened there, and it has their own original French name and an English name. So I will read out the English names for all of you. Workers leaving the Lumiere factory, the gardeners, the disembarkment of the Congress of Photographers in Lyon, horse trick riders, fishing for goldfish, blacksmiths, baby's breakfast, jumping onto the blanket, square in Lyon, and bathing in the sea. So these are the 10 uh, names of 10 actuality films which were showcased by Lumiere brothers. So from 1896, the Lumiere brothers screened their films in most of the major cities of the world through their representatives. So these cities include New York, London, Bombay, Montreal, etc. So cinema reached India on 7th of July in 1896 when Maurice Siesta, a French exhibitor, screened films in Watson's Hotel in Bombay using this same cinematograph machine. This screening schedule had Lumiere brothers' very popular film, which is called Arrival of a Train. By 1905, about 1,500 actualities were shot and shown across the world using Lumiere cinematograph. So, what were the major features of early Lumiere films? So, here they are for you in front of you. They are silent, they are shot on location, they are shot with a single reel of film, they are shot with hand cracked fixed movie camera. The screenings are accompanied by live orchestra and a running commentary to explain that what is actually happening there. The length of each of these films were less than a minute, and most of them are shot of real events, and they are not of staged events. It was not fiction, it was something which is actually happening. Therefore, we call them as actuality films. However, it is historically incorrect to say that cinema actually began with Lumiere brothers all of a sudden. The origin of cinema was actually a culmination of various artistic performances and technological developments that happened over a long period of time. In Film Studies Glossary, the period before the birth of motion pictures is generally known as pre-cinema period. According to film historian Richard Ebel, pre-cinema period not only refers to the apprentices and inventions um, in which early cinema was predicted, but also refer to the cultural, philosophical, and socio-economic context within which it emerged. So, let's look into some of the major technological breakthroughs and artistic inventions which made the movies possible by the time of the Lumiere brothers and other pioneers like Thomas Alva Edison, George Melies, everything. So, yeah, maybe we need to go back to the to the landmarks of the events which actually gave birth to cinema. The closest landmark in the history of origin of cinema is the invention of still photography, which was in year 1827. So cultural historians give the credit of inventing still photography to the French inventor named as Joseph Nepce, and the photograph named as A View from the Window at Les Grasse. It was titled, the title was given to this first photograph taken by Joseph Nipsey using a device called camera obscura. Camera obscura is one of the first generation photo capturing devices. And as you all know, that camera obscura literally means a darkened room or a dark chamber, right? So by 1839, the photographic camera became a publicly accessible tool with invention of daguerreotype by Louis Daguerre. The invention of still photography played a major role for the development of motion pictures some 7 decades later. So, cinema historians believe that the history of moving picture actually started with British photographer Edward Maybridge. In 1872, he tried to capture moving men and animals using a series of still cameras arranged sequentially with wires attached to the shutters of these cameras. We have a detailed lecture on this. You can always go back and look at it. We did study about all this in our previous sessions. So, when the moving objects touched their wires, the camera would capture their bodily movement at that particular moment. So, Maybridge captured 12 sequential still shots of a trotting horse in a way. So, when these individual but continuous still photographs were projected with Maybridge's image display, and this image display machine was Zupraxiscope at a particular speed, the illusion of movement was created in the human eye. And with with this illusion, we feel that the images are moving. When these discrete sequential images are projected at a particular speed, that is, and what is the speed? The speed is 24 frames per second. The optical illusion of movement is created in human mind. And this optical illusion is generally known as persistence of vision. So the biological phenomenon of persistence of vision in human eye retains the projected individual image in the retina a little longer even after its actual disappears. It disappears, but it still remains in our eyes. So such series of retentions of individual images create the illusion of movement in human mind. And according to a film historian, Eric Maybridge had foreshadowed a crucial aspect of documentary film, its ability to open our eyes to worlds available to us, but for one reason or another, not perceived. Okay, so let's look at some of the important inventions which are contributed to the origin of motion pictures. Definitely, Maybridge is one of the most important amongst them all, but they all have some or the other contribution there. So, right. So in 1974, Jules Janssen, a French astronomer, he captured a series of still shots of Venus passing the sun using his revolver photographic. Jensen's revolver photographic used individual film plates to catch each still shot. And then Jules Mary also contributed to the origin of cinema. Mary was a scientist, a come photographer who was born in France. So his contribution to the film, to the birth of cinema, was his invention of photographic gun. And this gun could capture 12 still images of a moving object in a second. And using these gunshot pictures in 1890s, he studied the human and animal locomotion as well. For instance, using his gun photography, he studied how cats always fall on their feet while landing on a surface from a height. So this was very interesting. Another important name in the history of early film is that of Thomas Alva Edison, the American inventor. He invented the viewing machine known as kinetoscope in early 1890s. So Edison also established the world's first permanent commercial movie studio, and the name of the studio was the Black Maria. It was in New Jersey in USA in 1893. So in this studio, he produced more than a dozen films from 1893 to 1901. And some of the films are Fred Odd's Sneeze, which was made in 1893, Rat Killing in 1894, Annabelle Dancer in 1895, and The Kiss in 1896. These were some of the popular movies produced by Edison during this period. Film scholars such as Wheeler, Dixon, and Foster, they point out that Edison tried to foreground female sexuality and bodily masculinity, while white racism and anthropocentrism through these films. Okay, so despite such criticism, Edison is acknowledged to be the first film practitioner who foresaw the immense entertainment possibility and commercial potential of cinema. While Lumiere brothers dismissed cinema as an invention without a future, Edison foresaw a commercial possibility and cultural potential of cinematic art. So let's look at the major differences between the Lumiere cinematograph and Edison's kinetoscope. So the most important difference between Lumiere cinematograph and Edison's kinetoscope is that the kinetoscope allowed only one viewer at a time during the projection, while the cinematograph uh, allowed mass viewing at the time during the projection. And to see a motion picture in Edison kinetoscope, the audience had to peep into the hole into the machine one by one. And then only you could see the action happening. And at the same time, the Lumiere's film could be projected on screen and enjoyed while sitting comfortably in chairs along with others in darkened auditorium. So this was the reason why Edison's film failed to appeal the mass audience in the beginning. But Edison's kinetoscope was heavier as well, and it was less portable, whereas Lumiere's cinematograph was lighter and portable, and they could take it to different places for projection, and many people could watch their films at same go. So, sensing the limitation of his projection machine, Edison later depended on Thomas Armand's Vitascope projecting device for screening his films. So most of Edison's films were shot in permanent studio, and the name of the studio, as I mentioned before, is Black Maria. So it is also important to note that most of the Lumiere films were shot on actual sites, whereas most of the Edison's films were shot in the studio. Okay. Now from here, let's move on to another important person in the history of cinema, and he is George Melies. Right, he's right there for you. Okay, so George Melies, uh, he a French by birth, is another very important person here. Um, in initial years of 20th century itself, Melies actually tried to bring into cinema the elements of magic, fantasy, illusion, and even space travel. He also introduced many special effects like reverse rolling of the reel, masking, dissolves, hand coloring of films, and double exposure, etc., etc., etc. And one of his films, A Trip to the Moon, which was made in 1902, is generally referred to as one of the first sci-fi films, that is science fiction films. So Malice anticipated the space travel and interplanetary voyages through his film. Again, the film historian Dixon and Foster say that George Melies' trademark brand of phantasmographical wizardry made him the godfather of special effects in cinema. Like Edison, Melies opted to shoot his films mostly inside the studio. One of his films, Infernal Boiling Pot, which was made in 1903, was another fantasy film directed by him, which has all these elements in it. You can easily find them on internet, and you can watch it. These all are around 12 to 13 minutes long films. So film scholars praise Melis for extending the optical illusionary possibilities for the cinematic art. For Melis, film editing is very, very important. He said that the film editing was more important than shooting because it is editing which gives film a style, a format, and a meaning. So, by the first decade of 20th century, cinema got established as a popular entertainment industry around the world. Many permanent indoor theaters dedicated to the purpose of film screening were built in different parts of the world during this time. And let me show you some of the early uh, film studios. Yeah. So some of them were called Nickelodeon. What was Nickelodeon? I don't think many of the of late 90s kids could associate it with the cartoon channel. But some of them, but these Nickelodeons were actually the cinema hall, which is the photograph in front of you. Is one of them. And why were they called Nickelodeons? Because each ticket for the was sold for a nickel or 5 cents in US currency denomination. Therefore, they were known as Nickelodeons. And then they were Odeon in the Greek, which is in Greek means roof theater. So we have Odeons in France, and we had what we say, we have Corsair Biograph Theater in Denmark. So the cinema in France, the buildings in 1902, French cinema halls were starting up. Nickelodeon in the US were built in 1905, and the Denmark were built in 1908. So we can see that gradually, when cinema got established as a popular entertainment industry, many permanent indoor theaters started coming up. Now let's move on to another important filmmaker of this time. Okay, so sorry. Now can you see it? Yeah, he is Edwin Porter. So in the first 2 decades of 20th century, Edwin S. Porter produced more than 200 films. However, just two films, The Life of an American Fireman, which was made in 1903, and The Great Train Robbery, which was made in 1903 again, are enough to immortalize the name of American filmmaker Edwin S. Porter in the history of films. In the first film, The Life of American Fireman, Porter combined actual documentary footages with stage shots in order to create the cinematic suspense. And the second film is considered to be archetypical film, which inaugurated the Western as a subgenre in cinema. And Hollywood played with this genre for a very, very long time. It had the film had thieves, it had robbery, it had cops, it had vehicle rides, hot chases, gunshots, murders, and final surrender. It had all the masala into it. And from the first decade of the 20th century till the 1920s, another filmmaker was a sensation in American film industry. So let's see who was he. David W. Griffith. So David W. Griffith, uh, as I mentioned, was a sensation in American film industry. So, what was the genre he was playing with? He was playing with the melodrama. He was playing with romance. He was playing with adventure. So, he was making variety of films. So, Griffiths highlighted cinema as a narrative form. He experimented with film techniques in which the adjustments made in the mechanical eye, the camera was given primary importance. His magnum opus is The Birth of Nation, which was made in 1915, which was based on the American Civil War. The huge box office success of this film could not rescue Griffith off the charges of racism and patriarchy, which was explicit in this film. And then in 1916, Intolerance was another major cinematic epic created by Griffith. His films are also known for their effective use of close up shots, large scenarios, and the fade outs and fade ins to indicate time lapse. Griffith is believed to be the inventor of close up shots. So most of his films were feature films. If the length of a film is around 40 minutes or more, it is technically called a feature film. So therefore, most of his films were lengthy uh, for that age, because earlier we have seen films which were 12 minutes, 13 minutes, 15 minutes long, right? Okay, now let's move on to India, which is a history of Indian cinema. Hmm. So, what was happening when the happening in India? As mentioned earlier, the history of Indian cinema began on 17th July 1896 when Maurice Siesta exhibited films including Lumiere Brothers' Arrival of a Train in Watson's Hotel in Bombay. So, what happened? Amongst the audience, Harish Chandra, Shakharam Bhatwadekar, a professional portrait photographer, was also present. He was amongst the audience at Watson Hotel. So Eric Bruno, uh, a film historian, says that probably Harish Chandra was the first Indian buyer of Lumiere cinematograph. So with cinematograph, Harish Chandra captured the documentary shots of a wrestling match which was held in Bombay in 1899 at a hanging gardens. The titles of his film was The Wrestlers, and it is considered to be one of the first indigenous Indian attempts in filmmaking. The first full length motion picture produced by Indian filmmaker is Raja Harish Chandra, which was released on 3rd May 1913. Of course, it was a silent film with Marathi linguistic milieu as it was directed by Dada Saheb Phalke. Dada Saheb Phalke is known as the father of Indian cinema. Alamara, which was made in 1931, directed by Ardeshir Irani, is considered to be the first Indian sound film or a talkie film. And at present, India is a major player in international film business. India has got more than 11,000 screens as of now, and it produces about 2,000 films annually in different Indian languages. Indian cinema is unique in its visual idiom and for its general thrust on melodramatic style centered around the joint family and domestic issues. Yes, Indian films are gaining popularity throughout the world. So let's proceed. Yeah. So in the history of early cinema, in 1920s, uh, this era witnessed a phenomenal presence of documentary films as a matured subgenre of film. Filmmakers like Robert Flaherty, Vertov and Gerson contributed greatly to the growth of documentary film. We will learn about documentary films in detail in another module. Uh, but we must understand that this was another kind of cinema which was happening during this time. And this is when we're talking about silent films, we cannot miss out Charlie Chaplin. Also, he also made his feature cinema debut in 1920s, and Frank Hoss just puts it. During the era of silent films, silence became an aesthetic state where silence was perceived less as an impediment that an as an artist choice. The history of silent films end with the emergence of first feature length sound film, or we can, as we say, talkie film. And the name of the film was The Jazz Singer, which was in 1927. And it was a musical directed by American filmmaker Alan Crosland. So this is the journey from the first films to the talkie film. We have to follow a synthetic model while engaging with cinema, because cinema is not only a art form, it is a composite art form which encompasses various elements. And now we will study about other elements and the other important filmmakers in our next session. Thank you, and I hope you have learned something out of it. Thank you very much.